welcome. I'm Eric Gao. You're watching TaiwanPlus, and here's what happened this week. Taiwan's newly elected legislators have been sworn in, and their first task was choosing the head of the legislature. Louise Watt reports.
After 2 rounds of voting, it's official. Taiwan's next speaker is Kuo-yu, a result that's set to shake up the legislature and make it harder for President-elect Lai Ching-te to get his agenda through. Han is from the Kuomintang, or KMT. For the past 8 years, it's been the main opposition party. Now it has the most seats in the legislature, no majority, but enough to get Han elected.
我相信广大的台湾人民期待一个认真问政、合作团结的立法院，心心念念都是为台湾老百姓来谋福利。
He beat the previous speaker, Si-kun, from Lai's party, and the third-party candidate, Huang Shanshan. Her party abstained from the second round of voting, and Han won with a simple majority. Han is a controversial figure in Taiwan. A populist politician, he lost the presidential race to Si-kun in 2020 and was then recalled as mayor of Kaohsiung City because voters felt he abandoned them. When Han was mayor, he traveled to China and met with officials from the Chinese Communist Party, raising questions of what his priority will be when he's speaker, whether he will try to reach out to China or do what his predecessor did and use the role to boost Taiwan's diplomacy and profile with Western nations. Patrick Chen and Louise Watt at Taiwan's Legislature for TaiwanPlus.
Now, after Han was elected speaker, Johnny Zhang of the KMT was voted in as the deputy speaker. Now, Han Kuo-yu is a household name here in Taiwan, and he may be familiar to some people overseas, from his time as Kaohsiung mayor to when he challenged President Si-kun for the country's top office. Joyce Tseng recaps the KMT's politician's career so far.
小老鹰在飞，下面有野狐狸在赶，切记，一言一行，各方面一定要谨慎。
Han Kuo-yu. He's the boisterous politician who's been grabbing national headlines for decades. He's now landed his most influential role yet. The Kuomintang politician has survived scandals, a mayoral recall, and a spectacular presidential election loss to Tsai Ing-wen in 2020. Now he will serve as Taiwan's legislative speaker.
It will be very interesting to see how this pans out. Han, he's a very affable and charismatic man. He has a very solid support base. Many in the KMT are very fond of him. On the other hand, he has a reputation for not being necessarily very diplomatic, speaking off the cuff and making gaffes, which may make it a little bit harder for him to maintain the neutrality and the diplomatic nature of the position of Speaker of the Legislature.
Han's opening political stint was as a lawmaker in 1992, in the very chamber he will now head. This is when he first entered the spotlight after assaulting then-fellow lawmaker Chen Shui-bian, hospitalizing the future president. After laying low for years, Han re-emerged in 2018 to run for Kaohsiung City mayor, in a race seen as a surefire win for rival party, the DPP.
民进党也不是高雄人的爸爸，为什么每一次要投他？人民才是政党的爸爸。
In a shock victory, Han landed the job with lofty economic promises. Just 3 months later, he shifted gear to bid for Taiwan's top office against incumbent President Tsai Ing-wen, but he lost, and by a large margin. Then another blow. Kaohsiung residents voted Han out as mayor, the first in Taiwan's democratic history. Analysts back then said it would be hard for the KMT to bounce back.
国民党不管怎么讲，你们需要去找另外一个 superstar。今天输掉了，被罢免掉了。在这种状况之下，国民党要在废墟上面呢重新站起来，确确实实是不容易的。
Today, the opposition party is still fighting to stay relevant after losing the presidential race to give the ruling DPP a historic third straight term in office, while a third reformist party continues to gain influence. But the KMT's role in local politics is far from over. having won the most seats in the country's legislature, giving it the speakership. Now, with tough-talking Han at the helm, the stage is set for some lively debates over the country's future. James Lin and Joyce Tsin for TaiwanPlus.
Shortly after Han was voted in, the incumbent speaker, Si-kun, announced his resignation as legislator at large for the DPP. Yo made that announcement on Facebook. He has held the speakership since 2020 after being elected as a party-list legislator. Before becoming lawmaker, Yo was chair of the DPP. He also served as premier under President Sun Sui-bian. Yo's legislative seat will be filled by the next person on the DPP's party list. That would be Hope Foundation chair and Dr. Wang Zhengxu. Taiwan held 2 days of military exercises around the country this week. Our reporter Jaime Ocon spoke to Kelly Greco, a security analyst in Washington, D.C., to find out how useful these drills are.
So Taiwan's military has just wrapped up these exercises ahead of the Lunar New Year. And one of the first drills involved these C-130 airplanes, these really big transport aircraft that play a huge role in providing logistics for Taiwan. But in the event of a conflict, how applicable is this kind of drill?
The first red flag I have there is what airfields do they believe they're going to be using in wartime that will not be destroyed by Chinese missiles to be able to move material that way? To me, that's just not going to be a viable way to do it. So they need to be thinking about other ways to do that, whether that's, having convoys and thinking about how to create decoys in terms of vehicles on the ground. Ukraine has been quite successful at that, about using decoys in that way. But I think what's really important is to practice in these exercises things that are actually going to be viable in wartime. And C-130s, for example, is something that doesn't strike me as particularly viable.
Another exercise that Taiwan conducted simulated how it would plant sea mines in the ocean in the Taiwan Strait. How applicable is that kind of drill in the sense of pushing more towards that asymmetric strategy?
One of the things that is useful about sea mines is they're relatively cheap. And, you can deploy them in different ways, including, you easily deploy them just from ships themselves. And it doesn't have to be even a military vessel. If you have training, you can train civilian fishermen how to, put these over. But one of the things that's really useful about sea mines is that they can really delay an adversary because China has the same problem that the United States would have in a mining area where you have to clear the mines, or you have to at least clear a portion of them so your vessels can get through. And the reality is there's not an easy way to do that really quickly. It simply takes time. But time is the one thing that Taiwan is going to want to try to create if it finds itself in a conflict.
And I just want to get your thoughts on this, Kelly, in the sense of the direction that Taiwan is going in terms of these military exercises. Is this more for show, or are these actually applicable if a conflict were to happen?
Well, I think what I would say is, first of all, is that logistics is incredibly important in war. And there's a tendency sometimes to focus on the shiny objects, the things that shoot, and the new technology and what it can do. But none of that matters if you don't keep weapons armed with ammunition, you don't keep soldiers fed. That stuff doesn't really matter. And we can see that in the Ukraine war. One of the real advantages Ukraine has had relative to Russia is that they've been much better at logistics. Logistics has been a major weakness for the Russians. So it's really fundamental to war, even if it's not the most sexy of topics. And I think exercising that's the closest you can get to an actual conflict situation without conflict, but practicing that, because there's so much you learn by actually trying to do that.
That was Kelly Greco, a security analyst from the Stimson Center, speaking to our reporter Jaime Ocon. Taiwan is denying allegation that its diplomatic staff burned a Nauru flag as they were packing up to leave the country. Louise Watt reports from the Foreign Ministry.
Taiwan's foreign ministry has denounced a video purporting to show its diplomatic staff destroying a flag of Nauru after it cut ties with Taipei in favor of Beijing. The video was published by a magazine in the Solomon Islands, a Pacific nation with close ties to China. In the video, a man is seen burning items, reportedly including Nauru's flag and other documents. But Taiwan's foreign ministry is protesting what it calls a false and maliciously slanderous report, saying that while it has destroyed sensitive documents as part of its withdrawal process from Nauru, The video was edited in an ill-intentioned way. The video comes as speculation grows that China could lure another ally away from Taiwan. 3 of Taiwan's 12 remaining diplomatic allies are in the Pacific. One of them, Tuvalu, has just held an election, and there are some fears that it could rethink its ties with Taipei after its next leader and government are decided. Justin Wu and Louise Watt at Taiwan's Foreign Ministry for TaiwanPlus.
An environmental group is accusing Taiwan's government of failing to protect people's basic rights and of violating the Constitution. Sally Jensen has more.
For the first time ever, Taiwan's laws are being challenged on a climate change-related issue. The Environmental Rights Foundation is holding a demonstration outside the judicial branch of government in Taipei, and they're saying that the groups and communities most impacted by the climate crisis are not receiving the intergenerational justice that has been promised to them under Taiwan's climate law that came into force around last year.
我们在这里要求政府能够更积极地防止气候变迁，然后进行减碳，避免原住民的部落在强降雨或干旱的影响下受到最严重的生存的威胁。
Indigenous people, farmers and children are all represented here as they're the groups most vulnerable to the impacts of the climate crisis, and Taiwan itself is highly vulnerable to these impacts. And they're submitting a petition to the government demanding that the government make short to mid-term goals under its climate law, that's periodic goals between 2026 and 2030, which they hope will help ensure their well-being and the survival of future generations. And the government has not yet responded to their demands or to this demonstration, but the activists here hope that they will spur the government into acting faster on what many here believe to be one of Taiwan's biggest existential threats. Kamashu and Sally Jensen in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
EVA Air pilots have called off a strike, ending fears of travel chaos during Taiwan's busiest travel season. John Van Trieste has details.
At this negotiating table, Vice Premier Zheng Wen-zhan has helped avert a crisis. To his left and his right, pilots and airline reps signed an accord. Pilots with Taiwan's second biggest carrier, EVA Air, had planned to strike Wednesday. The idea was maximum disruption just ahead of the Lunar New Year, when travel to and from Taiwan peaks. But with the help of government mediation, that plan is now canceled.
技师工会针对我们的薪资条件还有外站津贴的这些部分，不会再持续的争议，但是双方还是将来会持续的交换意见跟讨论。
The two sides agreed to pay raises based on rank and experience. The airline will also adjust the special allowances it gives out to pilots when they travel abroad. In addition, the airline has agreed not to hire more foreign pilots unless there's a special need. The pilots, for their part, agree that these issues are settled, at least until the end of May 2026. Transport officials say they're pleased with this result.
现在因为距离春节也快靠近了，也希望就是说大家能够坚守岗位，然后恢复正常，尽量能够为这次的春节来提供服务。
They want talks between the airline and the union to become more regular, so they can avoid similar near misses in the future. Kamashu and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Thanks for joining us for Here's What Happened. Download our app if you want to get more of our reports on your phone. Finally, get into the Lunar New Year spirit with these lanterns lighting up a temple in Malaysia ahead of the coming Year of the Dragon. I'm Eric Gao. Have a great weekend.
Let's pray for good health and good fortune.
And from everyone here in TaiwanPlus, we're wishing you a happy Year of the Dragon.